annual Painted by Quarterly podcast, PBQ Slush Pile. We have many objectives with this, and most concisely, we want to lift the veil on what happens between the act of submission and your receiving a response, whether it's a rejection or an acceptance. So we're going to try as hard as we can to replicate the process of our editorial board. Painted by Quarterly takes a while to respond, but that's because we have a democratic process and a minimum of 3 readers for each piece that comes in. So it takes a while. Once something gets even a maybe, it gets brought to an editorial table, which we're going to do for you today. And so it does take us a while, but we feel like it makes our process incredibly fair to writers. We also need to let you know that we have 3 staffs. We have a Philadelphia staff, a staff in Abu Dhabi, and a staff in New York. All 3 of those are comprised by editors who have been with us a long time, established in their industries, and then students who come and go. We love this and have been doing it this way for several years now, and we feel like this makes us have the most eclectic voice that we can possibly have, and so we're going to replicate that as well. Every month when we hope to bring you these podcasts, we'll have different groups chiming in and different people chiming in. So Marion Wren is with us today, and I'm wondering, Mare, if you have anything to add to the objective of this podcast?
I think the only thing I would add to the demystification aim is a fundamental move to really celebrate what makes a great poem great, or a great piece of writing great. And we know by the years of this democratic editorial process that it's really, these are idiosyncratic features, right? So identifying what makes a poem work, what makes a piece of fiction work is really part of this process too.
Wonderful. So Marion and I have been at the helm for probably more years than we'd like to admit, but let's just safely say over 20. We were babes in arms at the time, but so we'll do our introductions for today's podcast. The person you've heard so much from right now is me, Kathleen Volkmiller. So I'm co-editor of the Painted by Quarterly and director of the Drexel Graduate Program in Publishing and the Drexel Publishing Group. My own writing is primarily on the essay. I've been published in Salon and the New York Times and a bunch of other places, and so that's what I do. In the room with us today is also Tim Fitz. Hey, Tim.
Hi, Kathleen. So my name is Tim Fitz, and I'm a short story writer and novelist, and I teach here at Drexel. I teach first-year writing, and my short stories have appeared in journals like the Gettysburg Review, Granta, the Madison Review, the current issue of the Madison Review, and the Xavier Review, and magazines such like
Terrific.
these.
Hi, I'm Isabella Fidanza, and I'm a senior at Drexel University. So I've been an intern at the Drexel Publishing Group 3 times, and I've been a reader for the Painted by Quarterly for quite a while now. Really enjoy being part of the staff, and I've done quite a few internships in and around Philly in writing for nonprofits and also in the museum, sort of field. So I'm hoping to have a career that will combine the 2 things that I love the most. So
That's wonderful. Mare?
I am Marion Wren, and I am co-editor of the Painted by Quarterly. My essays have appeared in the journal Poetics and American Poetry Review. I write scholarly essays about journalism history and Cold War writing programs. And I am the director of the writing program at NYU in Abu Dhabi.
And through the miracle of technology, that's where we're talking to her from today. Thank you, Google Chat.
Yes, Google Chat. Greetings from the Middle East. And I feel deep empathy for the snow that you guys are experiencing. nice not to be in it. So apologies.
Well, it's gorgeous today. It's a blustery 33.
Lovely.
Brilliant
Lovely.
blue sky, though, and sidewalks are clear, so we're back out in the
Oh,
world around here.
rock on,
Yeah,
rock on, rock
yeah.
on.
So, at a regular editorial meeting, as I mentioned briefly, the submissions are read by three people, and even if only one of three readers says maybe into yes or anything that or let's discuss, that means it gets brought to the editorial table. So we're going to start off proceedings today by reading a poem by Leah Falk. It's called Visiting. And I'm going to read this despite my cold. I should have said I have a cold, but you probably can tell that I have a cold. Okay, Leah Falk, Visiting. When her only boy first felt his throat crowd, she thought of her father's boyhood fever, which washed over his heart like an ocean over sand. Sand, maybe a window once, in a house the ocean also claimed, which is to say, the body is for some a kind of furniture, in hard times hauled out to the yard and split for kindling. The color of her son's hair, red. Her father's offering at the pool of cells, once huddled in her abdomen. And their skin, pale, pink at cheeks and temples, a flush suggesting blood was only visiting the body. When the fever spread from throat to chest to joints, crumpling her child like rotted wood, she saw again her father close the bathroom door, heard the water soften what had gripped his heart. How else explain the rhythm of their home, irregular and buzzing like a strummed guitar, the strings held down with insufficient pressure? Little clot of air between rosewood and steel. And here he was visiting again, just like she'd always wished, sitting upright in her grown boy's only body, as if it were a chair, his chair, the one he'd waited patiently for her to offer. Okay, so that's Visiting by Leah Falk. What do we think?
All these pregnant pauses. I'm going to jump in. I love the work that she's doing here. And for me, I was seduced by the way the transformations are sort of set up, right? His throat crowds, and then she thinks of her father, and then suddenly there's this overlapping, right, of boy and father. And by the second stanza, you get this wonderful line, like an ocean over sand, period, sand, colon, maybe a window, line break once, right? And it's in that move where she just like tightly binds these overlapping things, and then she just has this like unfolding series of overlaps that like sort of comes to rest in a visitation, right? Like the father appearing inside the child, and this whole thing is in the mind of the speaker. I just love it.
Absolutely. And by the fifth stanza, so visually this is 3-line stanzas with an indented middle line. And by the fifth stanza, it becomes after at the pool of cells once huddled in her abdomen and their skin. Now it's a there. Mm-hmm. And that's how much of a unification there is between the son and the father. I really, that really jumped out to me as like very artfully done.
I have to agree. I really enjoyed reading this poem. And I think one of the things that stood out to me the most was just the third stanza and talking about the body being a kind of furniture, and the words split for kindling really have a specific kind of emotion attached to them. And I actually really enjoyed how she used the furniture metaphor to sort of tie the poem up at the very end. I thought it was cleverly done. I mean, when I went through it for the first time, I was sort of thinking, where is she going with this? But I think she made it work very well. And being able to tie in all these things tightly together, as you were saying, with different kinds of metaphors, nature, something a little bit more concrete with an inanimate object, I think is great.
Yeah. Isabella, I want to jump on what you just said too, because the poem does, like, I remember the first time I read it and heard it, it does threaten to go on a bit, right? Like it's a longish poem, right? And I find myself like fearing that she's going to lose control and rooting for her that she's going to maintain control. And boy, does she, right? Like, and it's, as you point out, like the way the poem comes to rest in this, this reiteration of furniture, and then this sort of visitation of the father into the child. It's really artfully done.
I think how she does that, or one way for me that she does that, is there are the little moments throughout it. For me, when I read a poem for the first or second or however many times, I look for moments that either make me wince and make me feel kind of embarrassed, or moments that make me feel jealous that I didn't come up with it. So like the little clot of air, the throat crowd, and at the end of the first page, a flush suggesting blood was only visiting the body. So those images I haven't seen before, described that way, and I feel like they've just been sitting out there waiting to be taken, and she got them. And now I want to see what the rest of the poem's about. So I sort of find these little moments, and if these moments present themselves, then I let the curiosity fill in the rest of it. And so that's usually how I go about it. But I really like those moments. For me, make it worth it.
Yeah. I hate to use such a horrible pun right now, but I must. I find this poem haunting.
Yeah.
I
totally.
do,
When I read
though.
this, I have to tell you, of course you do. You love visitation.
I do.
Right?
I do. I love a
you
good
love that.
haunting. Give me a good haunting
creepy,
anytime.
Eerie, wonderful uncanniness of it all. I mean, it's like on one hand, it's a love poem, and on the other hand, it's a ghost story, right? And it's like, dang, that's an interesting combination.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and at least for me, I feel like, not only is it this sort of interesting combination between love story and ghost story, but sort of towards the end of the poem, and Marion, just to sort of add a little bit to what you were saying before about the possibility of the speaker kind of losing control of her direction for the poem and what she's trying to convey, the part where we have the guitar coming up, for me at least, I felt as though the speaker was hinting at her own past, particularly with her relationship to her father, maybe some things that had gone on in her childhood home, and yet you sort of have it, and then she's able to bring it back to the present and talking to her own son, which I felt like was good, because she doesn't really quite go off on this tangent, and yet you get this hint that there's perhaps a tumultuous, family relationship. And so again, her father kind of coming to her at the very end of the poem in this somewhat haunting manner, I think makes it a little bit more adventurous, because you have that back hint there.
Yeah, totally.
Well, one other thing that isn't true to a real editorial meeting is how few people we have. We can have, really, I think we average in Philadelphia at least 10 people at a meeting, and it can be even more. So there's usually a bit more discussion, but at a certain point, when we're all kind of looking at each other and grinning, it's time to take a vote. And you're not going to see this on the radio, but I think that what we do is we do a classic 1, 2, 3 shoot. Thumbs up and thumbs down.
You know what? Wait, before you do that though, there's often a debate about how to do it when you're reading a batch of poems, right?
Right.
So are you voting on the batch? Are you voting one on one, like one by one?
Yeah.
Like what's your strategy?
Oh, excellent point. I think that the final group we're doing today, that comes up organically, but in this piece, I don't see that we need to move on. Sometimes I agree with you, Marion, that we even get like stymied and say, is there anything else from this author? Because we're a little bit stuck. But I'm feeling on this one that we're feeling like we could vote.
Yeah.
Yeah? So are you ready? Marion, how are we going to do you?
I don't know, man. Maybe we can I could send you an emoji.
All right, I turn my phone on,
So modern.
and
All right.
you email
Wait,
me,
hold on. I
text me
gotta
an emoji.
figure out how to send you an emoji.
All right,
Wait, hold on. That's super funny.
all right.
Okay, wait. I don't want to risk.
We could
losing
say
you,
1,
so.
2, 3 emoji.
Wait, I'm doing it now.
Okay.
Hang on. There we go.
All right. Are we ready in the
Okay.
room?
When
We're
you
ready.
say vote, I'm sending you an email.
All right.
Okay.
1,
One.
2, 3, vote.
Okay. You're gonna laugh at this. So, by the way, Jonathan bought me a cuckoo clock.
I hear
Can
it.
you hear? Can you hear?
I think every
fabulous.
home in Abu Dhabi should have a cuckoo clock.
It's a bright red cuckoo clock from Muji. And apologies, I meant to shut that off.
And also, if anybody noticed, that just cuckooed 9 times, ladies and gentlemen, because Marion is in our future. It's
I am.
Marion is calling us from the future. But as far as the voting goes, we got a resounding, unanimous thumbs up on that one. So that's a
Go Leah
special
Falk.
go Leah Falk. That is a special PBQ moment. Marion said at the start that how do you know what's good? Sometimes you know what's good, and I guess we did on that one. So there's no more debate, and we will accept Leah Falk's visiting. And we now have another poem from the same poet, and it's called Islands. Who would like to read that one for us?
Okay, I'll read it. Islands, Brooklyn, July 2014. We cycled toward the Verrazano Narrows through a strand of Sabbath islands. Teenage girls in black skirts go visiting like their mothers. Fridays, sirens sing at dusk, reminding us to divide our bodies from the calendar. Yesterday we woke to a video of a man Yesterday we vote to a video of a man gasping at his last rites. Mikado at a friend's grave wrote, "Y tu sin sombra ya," how soon you are without shadow. When the river dams, glass bottles gather. Somebody mutters, "Blessed is the fire maker," holds a bouquet of wicks above his daughter. Frame of twilights, where we built our little cottages, we can't live there still. The sun a stern guard before the door to dusk. A girl pedals toward the rail between her and the ocean, tumbles as if out of orbit. Somebody says, happy is the one who can divide the light from darkness. Whitecaps turn their backs on one another in the bay. Sorry for the delay of that last line. It was on a second page.
So
And
this one's set up with rather longer lines and lots of white space between each one. Each line is set up almost as long as it's with almost as much space as its own stanza, and they're longer. So. I hate to get the conversation started on a more negative note, but this one doesn't grab me like the last. I'm, what can we say about art that hasn't been said about its subjectivity? But for me, I'm just a bit too scattered. I think that might be the author's intention with that visual of the lines standing all on their own. But it's a bit too. I'm here and I'm there and I'm here and I'm there and I'm seeing too many desperate images.
Yeah, I have to agree. I felt quite conflicted the first time I read this, and I still do because I do appreciate some of the language and enjoyed reading several of the phrases. But I think this is more of a long description, and to me, nothing really comes together to form some kind of narrative or just an impression that the speaker had that was kind of coherent and pulling all the lines together. So kind of a pleasant read, but not quite as substantial for me either.
This poem for me still had those moments. It had the three moments. One was the Verrazano Narrows through a strand of Sabbath islands I really liked. And I love the line with waking to a video of a man gasping at his last rites. I think one reason I like that is because these days there's so many times where I don't want to see somebody dying, and I see it all the time just from some pop-up on Yahoo or something on YouTube. I'm trying to watch something, and I get flashed with somebody falling off a building, or I get to see those sort of faces of death things that I tried to avoid seeing, but none of us can avoid seeing it completely these days, and so we're constantly desensitized to it. I like that this poem brings that image in there, and I like happy is the one who can divide the light from darkness, but the spaces between those moments kind of leaves me not so engaged, and the line, in every thought being line by line, gets a little tedious, but not annoyingly tedious, just a little tedious.
Yeah. So I'm gonna respectfully and gleefully disagree a little bit with everything.
Okay.
So
go ahead.
So I think Tim and I are on the same page with that first line. Like, we cycle toward the Verrazano Narrows through a strand of Sabbath islands. Like, that image gets me too, right? It grabs me. And for me though, it is a sort of coded reference to Hasidic neighborhoods or Jewish neighborhoods in Brooklyn. So the Sabbath Island strikes me as a sort of coded reference to particular neighborhoods that are respecting the Sabbath, right? And so teenage girls in black skirts then calls to mind a very connected image of like Hasidic young women going on visits. Then Fridays, that's the sirens sing at dusk. That's a reference to, I believe, the neighborhoods that actually respect the Sabbath by blowing a siren, and then you're dividing your body from the calendar. Like, you're respecting the religious, sort of conventions of not working, not, for the very Orthodox, like not touching, sort of electricity and, et cetera, right? Yesterday we woke to a video of a man gasping his last rites. That one actually threw me, and I couldn't help but see, who was it? I think it was Eric Garner, like the man in Staten Island who was choked to death by the cops. And I don't know if that's intentional by the poet or if that's a big major like leap in my brain, but it's just what comes to me, right? And then I could go on, like the poem unfolds, and then when it gets to that line about dividing the light from darkness, like I think that's, and I'm a big, ginormous, heretic, and I don't know enough about the Bible, but I think that's a reference to God, right? Like, he who divides the light from the darkness. And then whitecaps turn their backs on one another in the bay. You're at the Verrazano Narrows. So like, it's a poem about place. It's a poem about those neighborhoods, and it's like encrusted with references to this particular culture.
Well, it's really wonderful that you pointed all those allusions out, because I actually thought, as you did, that it had sort of a religious overtone to it, but not being able to make the connections had a different impression of it. So I guess now the question for me is kind of bringing up this idea of, when you have a piece of writing, especially a poem that's so rooted in place and culture, but without making a specific kind of reference to it, or like an indication for somebody who's outside of that place or culture or community, how does one kind of, I guess, like look at that from an editorial point of view? Like, what would that be fine, or would that potentially give like a sort of a potential problem for a reader or something? So just opening up that discussion. Curious to your thoughts, but yeah.
Kathy or Tim, what do you think about that? Like, does the poem get better with that information, or does it?
I think definitely
more alienated from it.
I like it better now.
Yeah.
Because I had the moments already, and so when you talk about those other layers of the poems, for me it's enough to connect those great lines. That I also like where the river dams glass bottles gather. So those are four points for me that, as long as they're connected, and I have enough tension to get from one to the other. I mean, that's the way I read. I think I'm kind of a weird reader, but that's how I get to these moments, and that's what I try to do when I write, is you have these flashes, and then you have to connect everything between the flashes. And I don't think it's too much of an intuitive leap to talk about the situation with the man gasping his last rites, because I think that was July 2014.
Was it?
When that happened?
Yeah.
I believe it was.
Okay.
Yeah, this was just an interesting experience for me right now, because I was not that interested in that poem, like I said at the front. And then Tim seemed middle on that poem, but even as he was talking, I started to look at it harder. And then what Marion had to say really made it all connect for me. And I think that there is enough in here. What we talk a lot about at PBQ too is this a one-time read, or would you linger, right? Would you linger? Would you share? Do you want to look anything up and see if it happened in July of that, And if any of those questions are yes, then that does mean it's something that we should keep paying attention to. So I think, Marion, you just did some powerful work.
It's not special Abu Dhabi powers of distance and persuasion. But, I want to come back to what you and Isabella were saying, which is like, it does feel loose, right? Like, even the way it's laid out on the page, right? Those long sort of Whitman-esque lines and the space between them, right? So like, I do like it, I don't know, like that looseness must be working towards something. I'm not sure what, because it does feel like the motive of the poem really is a description of time and place, right? So I want to acknowledge that as a potential critique of the poem, but then also like put right on the table, we're looking for poems to fill that the locals issue, right? And this to me is like, boom, right? Fits right in that wheelhouse, right? And I don't know if the author intended to submit for locals where we stand with a page count, if we need more, but I would sort of carve this off this pile and earmark it for locals.
Right.
I'm still bothered by those issues too, but I'm not sure if that's my own personal hang up or, and I'd hate for that to be the issue.
Yeah, to sort of backpedal, I think, on what I said earlier. I mean, I do think that it has like a mysterious quality to it, like a bit of an alluring tone to it. So it's true that you might be motivated to do a little research and certainly linger on this piece if you were encountering it without any context. So I do think it has that in its favor, for sure.
Yeah. And now think about it, guys. Oh, no, it would be in two separate issues. I was going to say, think about it against the other one. It's kind of cool that they're set up so differently from one another, but it does seem like we would put them in two separate issues. Are you wanting to vote?
Okay.
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Wait, let me fire up the Google again. Hold on a minute.
Okay.
Okay. Hang on. Ready? Okay. Yeah. Okay, go.
1, 2, 3, vote. And it's in. All right, 2 for 2 for PBQ. I'm wondering if we should do a little small vote right now. We have another poem by Leah Falk, but we do have other work to discuss. How do you think we're doing for time? Do you think we should move to another poet or do this third piece?
We got about 25 right now. So
We've spent 25 minutes?
Yeah, 25 since the real start. So if you want to do 30, then we do 30.
Yeah, we can do it in 5 minutes.
If you want to do 45, do 45.
What, and not do the
In
other
10 minutes.
poems at all?
Oh.
The other poets?
We just crank it up, make it a little faster.
We're going speed mode.
I would vote for finishing out Leah Falk,
Yeah.
and if we want to put Emily or Clara to another conversation, because we were interested in extending, having several conversations. I think that'd be great. I think I would rather stay with Leah.
And you have,
Leah's work.
you have an hour, 15 minutes.
Yeah, we have a lot of time in this studio. And, apologies, podcast listeners. If you're listening to this, that's really good news because it means we didn't think it was that bad and we put it in our lineup. But we appreciate your patience as we figure out ourselves what the heck we're doing. So, yeah.
I also want to note how nice it is finding out, being a reader now after years of only submitting stories from the other side, that there can be editors who aren't on board with a poem, then hear one of the readers pitch and can be convinced at the editor's table. It helps it seem a little more hopeful as a writer.
Yeah.
That if you
Well,
can
that's
win,
what we're
if you
about.
win a couple people, and they believe in
Yeah.
it, then
Yeah.
they can change.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's
Change your
happened
mind.
Well,
countless times, almost every meeting,
yeah.
right, Marion?
Yeah,
Yeah, you know what, Tim, I swear, like that's the thing that, you know, Kathy and I were sort of rooting for with the slush pile, like to be able to have a conversation around a piece of work and have your mind changed because, you know, people are careful readers and willing to linger. I love that word, lingering, too. It's like you linger in the piece long enough and it opens up, right? And
Yeah.
that's delightful, right? It just
Yeah.
teaches us all to slow down a little bit. So that's kind of cool.
Right. I especially love it when a student is the person who brings the
Yeah.
poem to the table because,
Yeah.
you know, often work is dismissed at the table.
Right.
And when a student finds something and then the table can turn around on it, it's pretty miraculous.
Yeah.
So okay then, who would like to read Commonest in Nature? The one that starts with seeds with plumes and wings.
I think I will take a crack at it. so-
Wonderful.
Hit it, sister.
Okay.
Isabella.
Seeds with plumes and wings, bone, mostly lime, fresh eggs so soft they hardly hold together, newborn babies growing old, our bodies tiny bricks. You said, I always seem to want to make things from the thing that's commonest in nature. Then, out of air, you made a machine. What commonness you'd find if you were here, what shapes and colors would repeat, and what wild, silent rhythms. Come back. I want the worlds you would have found hiding in this one. The brain's loop and resistance, blood, mostly water, air and electricity. The birch in the yard, dead parts holding living ones together. What would you make of this now? Commonest thing. Your face, still a child's. Reading, the amoeba crawls by changing shape like a drop of water down a window pane, swimming round to me each morning like the chorus of a hymn.
For me, this one doesn't have the same moments as did the
Okay.
other poems did have. And it seems like there's a pattern with a lot of our submissions where when you get one really knockout poem, the next one's really good, and the next one is not as good, and they keep descending. But I like seeing it because you can see where the other poems came from.
Yeah.
You can see working through the same types of themes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's definitely true.
And yet, what's interesting to me is, again, the visual that the listeners are having right now with us, but which is something we'll need to talk about. But this one, structure is entirely different than the other two.
Yeah, and I wish Islands was set up this way because I like the structure.
It's like islands, isn't it?
Yeah, but I don't like the structure of Islands.
I have to say, I loved the experience of Isabella reading it and having my eyes on the poem on the page, right? And I wonder, as we were thinking about this podcast, like how we could even approximate that for the listener, right? Because I know it's a completely it's pleasure for the ears, right, to be listening to a podcast, but the duality of listening to Isabella read and then being able to see that poem unfold, right, is just super cool. I have to be honest with you. This poem baffles me. I didn't know who Sarah Turing was, so I had to look her up. And the project of the poem was a little bit baffling to me. And yet, there's stuff in there, to use Tim's language, like that also just like grabs me, like really powerful images. So Sarah Turing is Alan Turing's mother, I believe. Right, so that whole commonest in nature thing is actually a reference to science, and if it's Sarah Turing, the mother of Alan Turing, the poem is like the average reader it might not get on first read.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I actually was sort of getting the impression that this was, at least in part, a piece about the fact that everything in nature is connected and that the world sort of works on this circular pattern of things being very intricate on a smaller scale. You sort of have these references to the amoeba, the way that the brain works on this very sort of zoomed in level, and then we're zooming out again. And I actually do like the idea of this sort of silent pining for perhaps a love of some kind or someone that you're affectionate about. And I think just the reason why, the fact that this person is able to have some kind of insight and the author being able to express that, I felt was interesting. But I think to me, the weakness of the poem is perhaps linking all of these things together in a way that's effective, because it feels pretty divided for me. I almost felt like you have these kind of chunks, and I think the opening of the poem with the first stanza has, again, some very interesting language, but I don't really know if it completely does a service to the piece. I sort of think it's there, and yet doesn't quite set the reader up for what the writer is really trying to get at later in the piece, perhaps. But
what do you guys think about that first stanza? This one, like the other one, even though the structure is so different. So in this one, we have flush, right, justified, 5-line stanza, then a stanza break, and then another stanza that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines with too complicated of air between those lines for me to explain on air. So I'm kind of reading them like separate, unified pieces of a whole, like islands, if I were to say that. And I'm really not interested in that first stanza.
So I'm thinking of what the listener's experience is going to be. They might not remember it, right? So, Isabel, would you just reread the first stanza?
Gladly.
Just the first stanza.
Sure. Okay. Seeds with plumes and wings, bone, mostly lime, fresh eggs so soft they hardly hold together, newborn babies growing old, our bodies tiny bricks.
Right. So in a way, it's got what feels like a compressed version of the list effect of the first poem we looked at by this poet. But I'm also, I have to say, I remember Shanna Compton once telling me about a poem that felt like the author was clearing her voice or clearing her throat before the poem actually started. And this feels like throat clearing a little bit. It's like, right? Yeah. And then Jason Schneiderman, who happened to be a reader on this poem, actually made a suggestion that's very much in line with Kathy's reaction to that first stanza. He suggested doing away with that first stanza and reading the poem starting with the second stanza.
Right.
So, Isabel, you want to try that?
Read the whole poem again?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just from the second stanza.
Okay, all right. You said, I always seem to want to make things from the thing that's commonest in nature. Then, out of air, you made a machine. What commonness you'd find if you were here, what shapes and colors would repeat, and at what wild, silent rhythms. Come back. I want the world you would have found hiding in this one. The brain's loop and resistance, blood, mostly water, air and electricity, the birch in the yard, dead parts holding living ones together. What would you make out of this now, commonest thing? Your face, still a child's, reading, the amoeba crawls by changing shape, like a drop of water, down a window pane, swimming round to me each morning like the chorus of a hymn.
And now with that title being Commonest in Nature, Sarah Turing, knowing that that's Alan Turing's mother, the poem completely sharpens its focus.
Yeah.
I think.
What a great way to say it, just sharpens its focus. As probably Painted Bride Quarterly's most abrasive editor, I will say that there are often trigger words. There are I'm owning it at least, I guess. I hope that counts for something, my admissions. But
she's lovingly abrasive, though.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Amen.
Lovingly
Amen.
abrasive. That's on my bumper sticker. So there are certain trigger words, and as we all know, editors at literary magazines have so much to read that there might be certain images or words that would trigger me off a piece, and baby birds would be one of them for me.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
Yep, and that is why I think I have an issue with that first stanza.
Yeah.
And to begin with, you said, I always seem to want to make things so much more energy, so much more,
Right.
passion and distillation that it changes everything for me. So let's talk about this for a minute, PBQ editorial staff. There are some magazines that will do editing of your work once it's submitted. PBQ has long held a position that, even more so with poetry, send it to us when it's finished, and the poet's job is the writing of the poem. But on occasion, when an edit is, let's call it easy, let's call it really clear, like, can we delete that first stanza? Or your poem actually ends here, not there. Or this title doesn't do much for your poem, right? When things are easy, we do occasionally write the author, and ask for an edit if it's clean. And I think I would stand by that proposal on this poem.
Yeah. Well, the only thing I would add to that, like, description of when we intervene is also like the ginormous respect given to the author, right? Like, thinking, okay, would this poet be offended, right, if we said cut that first stanza, right? Is it so against the project of the poem, or does it, like, forward the poem in a really important way, right? So I know you described yourself as abrasive, but I also know that you are deeply compassionate and think into the project of a poem or the project of a piece of fiction. Is this suggestion in keeping with the vision of the piece, right? So I would just throw that out there.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I just love that everybody's defending me and my abrasiveness. That's my favorite. My favorite part.
Now you have to perform it. Right?
My favorite part of today. But I do think that's what I'm saying, is that first poem might make people dismiss it in a way that they should not, right?
The first stanza.
The first stanza. Yeah.
I would stop reading.
Yeah.
I would stop reading.
Right.
You'd hit baby birds and you'd be like, next.
So all of that said, I think that we should write the poet and ask her to cut off the last stanza. So I'm going to move.
No, the first stanza.
First stanza. What do I keep saying?
Yeah.
Line?
The only thing.
You said the last stanza.
Oh, first stanza. And I would make that move. I would right now ask that vote to be with that edit. Like,
Can we
do you vote yes
also,
with that edit?
so I
But wait,
totally,
I want to hear from Tim.
I totally agree. Shaving off the first stanza makes everything more focused and more interesting. But if you look at the other poems, each of those other poems have those killer lines like clot of air, pool of cells, flush suggesting blood was only visiting the body. And this poem doesn't really have any of those. Which,
I'll argue that.
Really?
Yeah. I like the 1, 2, 3, 4th stanza. The brain's loop and resistance, blood, mostly water, air and electricity, the birch in the yard, dead parts holding living ones together. That's powerful for me.
I think I would defend that first stanza for the impact of I'm sorry, this is really confusing. The new first stanza. So starting the poem with you said,
yeah.
I always seem to want to make things from the thing that's commonest in nature, then out of air you made a machine. Knowing that that's a reference to Alan Turing and the Turing machine, whang, like that, just like, what? I'm in a different universe and I'm paying attention, and I like the sort of spaciousness and the lyric quality and the way that anchors to something quite real.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
that's for me, right? But I take your point, Tim. Like I kind of lean towards what you just said. Like, I know Kathy's got the lines that resonate, but yeah, that's
I think
what I think.
if I read this, I mean, I don't dislike the poem, I think, but when I compare it to the other two, I mean, for me, there were those moments that I really liked. I mean, I'll remember, I'll think about Claude Aver months from now.
Yeah.
Because I just absolutely love it.
Yeah.
So I want more of those, but it doesn't necessarily mean just because I want more of them, I'm gonna get it here.
Right.
So I don't find I find a lot offensive about the first stanza. I don't find anything offensive about the next four.
But you're not as praiseworthy
I
either.
just want that. I had just had the Claude Aver. Now I don't have the Claude Aver.
Yeah.
So I'm just sort of yearning.
Yeah. Oops.
You're yearning for the Claude Aver.
Yeah.
Well, let's still go for a vote. Let's vote still. Right.
Wait, only if Tim promises to go home and write the poem that starts with "I'm yearning for the cloud of air."
Well, I just really hope this podcast goes on air because Marion said "wang." Did you hear that?
That's true, and this should,
Yeah,
this
you
should,
did.
this
Yeah,
should give
you
you an
did.
idea of
So
how
that's
we
my
are.
second favorite moment of today. So let you start that poem, okay?
Okay.
Okay.
That's the title.
So sometimes at meetings we do crazy stuff, like we do a few rounds of voting where we go, okay, who votes yes as is? Who votes yes with a new title? Who votes yes without that first stanza? But in the interest of time and everything else, and the fact that there's less of us than normal, let's just do a vote on asking her to remove the stanza that begins with seeds with plumes and wings. Okay? All right.
Yeah.
1, 2, 3, vote.
I say yes to that.
Okay.
Wait, I'm supposed to email it.
You know what? Our thumbs were already in the air, so it was still
All right, good.
it was still blind, and it all happened at the same
Right.
time. And yeah, so go Leah Falk, 3 for 3.
Yeah. Boom.
I feel really compelled to tell our audience that never happens at a meeting.
Yes, I'm personally very impressed. So
Yeah.
woohoo!
3 yeses in a row is a wonderful ratio. So I wonder if we should do Emily Corwin,
Yeah,
since
just,
the Clara Fang are long.
yeah, these are pretty quick reads, I think, in the scheme of things.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
You guys in? All right. Marion, you haven't read yet. I hate to just throw that on you, but you want to read this one?
No, it's fine. This is the Emily Corwin, Pink Girl Takes a Tumble.
You got it.
Yeah. All right. And so, it's funny. It's like 20 years ago when we started this, Kathleen, we would remember sitting around eating hummus and then holding up individual pieces of paper and saying, the poem looks like this.
Yeah.
Right? So we
Yeah.
would actually show people what it looked like before, and you couldn't even see the words. You could just see the shape of the poem. And I say that because this poem sort of stretches out across the page. There's some strange, wonderful, like spacing midline. And it's clear that Emily Corwin is playing with the spacing on the page in Pink Girl Takes a Tumble. Squish, squash, she walks. She dreams of woods, trees hankering for child meat. The way is wet and terrible. What can she do? Boo-hoo. Spreads her mouth real big, dry lips, doesn't like water, and she crackles. Feels so crumbly she do, too gimped up, too scaredy cat to skate across the river, bones so skinny brittle, oh fiddlesticks. She slips downhill like Jack, like Jill, curls roly-poly to the pit. She pulls the bad hip out and chews on it. Okay, before we go any further, was this submitted for Monsters? Because we are doing a special themed issue called Monsters. So I think that's important to sort of frame.
Yes.
yeah,
As well.
absolutely.
Yeah, this was submitted for Monsters. So I think this poem is having so much fun with language, but I am a literal person, and I'm having a hard time determining if Pink Girl, the she, is Little Red Riding Hood or an old witch. I'm not sure which, and I kind of need to know. I have a need to know on this one. Although it's super fun times.
Well, I think the pink girl is a creepy ass character. Like she's just both, right? Like she's a baby doll and a vicious witch all mashed up. That's what I think. But wait, can I, before we go any further, what was that YouTube meme like a million years ago? Somebody takes a tumble, like Charlotte takes a tumble. Do you guys remember this?
A YouTube meme?
Like it was a popular video, and it was like a young woman standing on a table and she's dancing, and then she falls backward, and it was like got a bazillion hits.
I remember that now. I didn't know it was called Takes a Tumble. I do remember
Charlotte
that.
Takes a Tumble, and I don't think it was. I don't know if it was Charlotte or not, but anyway, so that title, Pink Girl Takes a Tumble,
makes you think
like
of
just,
that.
Yeah, it just calls that in mind. But that's, anyway, that's a reader-based response, not necessarily what the author's intending here.
Yeah. Our wonderful technician, Joe, just pulled up that video for us.
Nice.
We love Joe.
I do remember it. A woman's dancing on a coffee table, and the coffee table breaks. But
and is it called,
I did
Charlotte
not.
Takes a Tumble?
What's the name of her, Joe? Charlotte. It is Charlotte. You had Charlotte right. I did not. I do know that video, but I did not think of it. Just for whatever that's worth. Of course, everybody's brains can work different. What do you guys think?
I'm conflicted, which happens fairly often, I think. But I do really, really like some of the language that happens here. And it is great that it's this sort of going back and forth between the evil imagery and the sort of sadistic quality to it, and yet, cute as well. I think the thing that kind of puts me off, though, is really just sort of the last stanza. We've got the rhythm here, slipping downhill like Jack, like Jill, roly-poly to the pit. That's fine. It doesn't really do much, I don't think, to enhance whatever's going on. It's just really to continue the movement of the poem, which is okay. But then, and I know that the last part is really supposed to leave the reader with this continuous question of, what is this character? Are we talking about something that's literal, that's metaphorical, the chewing on the hip and the bone again? But I do still kind of feel like it's a little disconnected from the rest of the piece. So, again, having this feeling, as you were saying, of not really quite knowing what's going on. It doesn't have to have too much closure, I guess. But at the same time, having read it a couple of times, I'm still kind of feeling like I wish I had a bit of a better idea. So it's not quite sitting as well with me as I would like, I guess.
I kind of like the image of pulling out the bad hip and chewing on it. But I kind of also felt like about halfway through the poem, I was going to read Jack and Jill somewhere. And when Jack and Jill showed up, I was kind of turned off.
Oh, dear.
You didn't want to predict it.
Yeah. So, So I wasn't so enthusiastic. I mean, I like hankering for child meat. These things that kind of stick out, kind of creep you out.
Yeah.
Those are nice, creepy images. But
pops out like a bad hip. I get it, Isabella.
I think trying to vocalize it is sort of hard, but I guess having read some interesting takes on fairy tales that especially put this very deliberately creepy tone on top of a traditional story and have a way of reworking it, like I can see that that's a theme that's running through this, but I don't feel like it's quite as polished as that you could necessarily take that away, So I'm I'm not really quite sure what I'm comparing it to in my mind, but I'm feeling like it's reaching for this standard and it's kind of getting there, but it's not quite there.
I just read, what was it, Michael Cunningham, the I think it's called the Swan Swing or the Wild Swan or something like that, and it was his like reinvention or his take on fairy tales, right? Like the Hans Christian Andersen stuff and fables, and so it's a very sort of like grown-up approach to stuff like, Hansel and Gretel, right? But Isabel, I take your point, like this doesn't go there, right? Like the pink girl does not map onto the witch in the candy house, right? Like that doesn't, it's not a one-to-one correspondent. Like she's some new thing that like goes back to Kathy's point. Like, is she a witch or not? Like what is she is not clear.
Yeah. So this is a group, and this is a kind of poem where I would definitely say, is there more from this author? Is this part
Right.
of a series?
Right.
Because it is fresh enough, and we don't often get child meat.
That's true.
Right. No.
We've had some interesting
So-
pieces go through the table
No.
in our
Right,
time.
right,
Yeah.
right. Not
So you know what?
often, not often.
Before we go to the next poem in this batch, though, I did want to just say, if you simply just look at the words on that page and what the poet's doing with like vowel sounds and like double letters, right? Like in the first line, she's got the SQU of squish and squash, right?
Mhm.
And then that gets picked up with a sh of she, right? And
Mhm.
then in the next line, you start to see the double O of woods. And if you just trace your eye down the poem, you can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like 5 instances of these double O's, double amazingly well orchestrated, and like a real play with language. And especially like she slips downhill like Jack and Jill, curls roly poly to the hit. She pulls the bad hip out and chews on it, right?
Mhm.
Like there's, boy, is she playing with repetition, alliteration, you know, assonance, consonants, the whole 9, right? Like, and it's really visual. So
Well,
I just wanted to say that before we moved on.
The rhythm
Well-
is great. That's true. I mean, I'll concur with you on that for sure.
absolutely. I mean, that's exactly why I'm saying I would want to see the next poem, because what she's doing with language is so much fun that even though
Can I
don't
read the next one too?
I don't know, right, even though I don't know what the heck is happening, I absolutely want to spend more time with this author, you know.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so do you really want to read the next one too?
I do.
Oh,
It's,
go ahead.
it's small,
I
it's
do.
short, right?
You're getting
I
right
do,
into
I
this poem, aren't you?
So this one is called Thwack, THWACK, Thwack by Emily Corwin. Leg buckles and boom, down she goes into snow powder, good for packing. She tucks and rolls like a cold boulder glob, crashes to his windowsill, ferocious little she, hunger-filled, her mouth frothing like half-starved pack of wolves, all teeth and velvet. That's it.
And seed.
And seed.
That's a continuation of the first one for me, and therefore I dig it. I like tucks and rolls, and I love ferocious little she.
Is there an missing, like an article, like a half-starved pack of wolves?
That was bothering
Is
me
that-
too. I wasn't sure.
Yeah, I'm not
if
sure
it was
either.
deliberate
And
or
she's-
not.
Yeah,
But
yeah, like half-starved pack of wolves, and she doesn't do stuff like that anywhere else, losing a preposition. But
yeah.
or I mean, yeah. So, but listen, seriously, don't we want thwack on our table of contents?
I said wang, so definitely I'm an advocate of thwack.
Thwack. I just love the
Thwack.
idea of looking down the list of poem titles and seeing thwack. You know, I'm kidding, but not kidding. You too?
I'm not as crazy about these poems, but I'm not crazy about like little moments like half-starved pack of wolves. For me, is not so interesting, but I do like all teeth and velvet. I mean, that's something that definitely redeems.
How do you feel about a cold boulder glob?
I think the language
it.
is quite heavy there. For me, that was a definite weak point in the poem. Like I wanted to sort of skip over that because the rest of the language is much sharper. And I also have to agree with Tim that I think it's not, for me, it's not quite as vibrant as the previous poem. Half-starved pack of wolves rhythmically works, but is not. The rest of the imagery is all quite unique, like a little bit quirky, and I think that that's kind of veering into the territory of like cliched a little fairy tale if you're kind of going for that. But more bothersome for me was cold boulder glob, because I kind of feel like you just and you stop there and it disrupts the flow. And again, because people can't see the way the poem is set up on the page here like we can, it does sort of have the structure that the words are almost falling down the page, a bit like a waterfall or a hill or something you could be sledding on, and it sort of just sits in the middle there for a minute. So maybe not such an issue for some people, but I do feel like it was a bit of a weight on the rhythm of this piece.
And I want to jump on that too, because there's something like logically fatutzt there, right? So it's a cold boulder glob crashes to his windowsill. And when I spoke his, I'm like, wait, who he? There's a he? Who's his? Like, is the, right? Like, what's that?
Yeah,
What?
we don't quite know.
Right?
Yeah.
And so unless it's personifying the cold boulder glob as like a dude, right? But it doesn't make any sense. That defies sense for me. So I'm glad to know that I'm not completely alone in that.
I move that we read the other two too.
Yeah.
And then vote on all the four as a group.
Four.
Yep.
All right. Well, I'll stop hogging the microphone. So somebody else want to read Emily Corwin? It's super fun.
I'll do Out Like a Lamb. Out like a lamb. Into the carrot patch, into the April pussy willow wildness. She makes a mud cake, shakes her pretty rhododendron hips and dips into the dirt-clawed smooshy. She sinks and sags, a screaming seed into the planet rock. Oh, how it eats. It leaves the bone. She comes up pushing daisies.
I think this one is very memorable. The first time I read it, I think I didn't quite absorb it as well. And then I read it again, and this idea of, sort of a bit of a twist on the natural processes that happen around us, and then sort of taking a perspective on how does something feel, a screaming seed, and not really wanting to grow or to go back into the earth or whatever. I don't know. I think it's just a very unusual perspective, and I really appreciated that. And I actually like the kind of play on words with the title too. Spring coming in out in like a lamb and out like a lion or whatever that phrase goes. So I appreciated that. I think the dirt-clad smooshy kind of hung me up a little bit again, like the cold boulder glob, because it was going so well. But that could just be me, so I don't want to,
The moments that stop you are the moments I love.
If it fits
All right.
smoothly or something, I don't know. But.
Did anybody get hung up on the planet rock? Right? Like, or is it just me, a child of the 80s, that immediately started singing rock, planet rock, don't stop? Do you remember that song?
Yes.
Like, I haven't seen Planet Rock in a really long time, and it's a great hip hop song from the 80s that is worth acknowledging, because it's just worth acknowledging that has nothing to do with this poem. But when you use that phrase, that happens to the person's head.
In a bad way.
I don't know if it's a bad way, right? Because it is the stanza after dirt-clawed smooshy, and it's weird, right? And screaming seed. Like, I'm so distracted by she sinks and sags, a screaming seed into the planet rock. And then I have this thing happen in my head that references hip hop. And then, oh, how it eats, it leaves the bone. She comes up pushing daisies. So Planet Rock and Pushing Daisies to me are the moments where it's like you kind of risk a strangeness that verges on cliche. But I think Isabella pointed out, like, Out Like a Lamb is already flipping the cliche. Right?
I really do understand where you're coming from, Marianne. And normally a phrase like pushing up daisies would really make me cringe so hard. But I think for me, the reason why it works in this context is because we do have this almost like viciousness to nature or whatever that's coming out here, and this sort of idea of the bones being like spit out, and the pushing up daisies, to me it has a bit of like a sarcastic flair to it, which I think if it didn't have, then it really wouldn't work. So that's just something to throw in the pile there.
Well, you just won me over because you kept saying pushing up daisies, because pushing up daisies is actually the phrase, and she's got it. She comes up pushing daisies.
Yeah.
So it's birth and death smushed together. Right? Like, it's the same kind of smushy inversion as Out Like a Lamb. So she comes up like a birth, pushing daisies, which is the death. Right? Because if you're pushing daisies, you're in the ground.
You guys are making me feel like a big dummy, because that was the line that did make me cringe. She comes up pushing daisies. And to end on that was like so bad for me. I'm digging this group in a general way. I'm digging the group.
Yeah.
But I wasn't digging this one.
Yeah, Pushing Daisies had the opposite effect for me as the velvet teeth. All teeth in velvet.
Yeah.
I can understand that, Tim.
So you don't dig it.
I don't dig it.
Yeah.
But I didn't really get there because Dirt Clod Smushy kind of knocked me cross-eyed.
Dirt clod smushy with the boulder.
But by the
But
third
it's
poem,
rhododendron hips.
I liked the rhododendron hips, but also it's clear to me that this type of poem or this type of poetry is somebody's thing or it's not their thing. So I'm not saying I don't think it's bad. It's just not my thing. And when I hit Dirt Clod Smushy, then I kind of tap out.
Oh, that's so funny.
Tap out. That's awesome.
I love this.
Call the ref.
Everybody's
Call the
opinion is so different, right?
We're a diverse group.
Right.
We are.
We have
are.
one more by Emily Corwin, so I think we should do that and then see what we think of 1, 2, 3, and 4. Who's going?
All right.
All right.
Sprinkle her with fruit punch, sugar powder, glitter glue. She's tickled pink. She's sitting real pretty, all the way to the crushed velvet coffin box. Girl with broken armholes, girl with a heart splattered, strawberry pulp, mushy under her blouse. Good night, pink girl. Go back into crinoline, into creepy crawlies, your nose smothered with a calla lily. The bedbugs want a bite.
Well, we're not supposed to have dead air on a podcast, so you've left me with no choice but to say I'm the coldest on this one.
I am as well. The beginning is a little flirty almost, or playful, and so I think it sort of set me up for this even the crushed velvet coffin box. I was kind of waiting to see what would happen, but I think the rest of it just went a bit the way of what I was expecting here. We're talking about death. We're talking about creepy crawlies, and it lost the edge of the sharpness for me because there was nothing kind of playful or sassy about it in the way that the rest of the tone had sort of been. So it kind of just didn't do that much for me, unfortunately.
Which is too bad
I
because
love the word sassy.
Yeah, I was just thinking that. What a great word.
I mean, you have fruit punch, sugar powder, and glitter glue all together, so that's...
Right?
That's pretty
know.
special.
Right?
That's pretty sassy.
Sorry, Tim, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
which is too bad because I like strawberry pulp mushy under her blouse.
I do actually like that phrase.
So I wish
But
there was
yeah.
more before and after that could.
Tim, it's interesting that mushy is appealing to you, but smushy is not.
Yeah, it's funny how it works that way, isn't it? That's why I tell my students it's just sometimes just one
I
letter.
have to agree. I think that of the 4, this one doesn't surprise me in the ways that the other ones did, right? And I don't linger with it. And to use a word from earlier, it doesn't. I don't feel like it's not sticky, which you'd think it would be with glitter glue. Ha, but not sticky.
Ha ha, Marion.
Sorry.
Well, for me, the bed bugs want to bite is such a bump in a bad way. And that's how I got that she comes up pushing daisies too, is bump. Even though I understand what Isabella's saying about the sarcasm on that one, that was her intention. But for me, it still goes bump. So, I'll just get the party started by saying that I would go for Pink Girl Takes a Tumble and Thwack, 1 and 2 of this group.
And I'm going to jump in and say that I actually think this pile does exactly what Tim described, about 10 minutes ago, that some of the work that we look at has that impact of descending, right? Like the great stuff is up front, and then by the time we get to the end of the pile, they're not as resonant or robust or weird in a good way. So I'm with you, Kathleen. I kind of think the first 2 have my attention, despite the confusions of Pink Girl Takes a Tumble. I'm happily, I think it's cryptic and weird enough to sustain my attention, and ditto with Thwack. All teeth and velvet. Wow.
So we're gonna vote. Should we vote on the?
Well, why don't you tell us in a general way, like if you had to pick out of here, maybe
Well, if I had-
would you?
If I if I had to pick, I would I get fixated, as I mentioned, on these moments, and I feel like if these are in a journal, the ones that I wouldn't read more than once, but I can see other people. I understand the fascination of looking at the patterns of the of what's happening within the language. So I would go for those moments where they have those images like all teeth and velvet, thwack, and probably not out like a lamb because there's not enough surrounding. There's not enough for me following rhododendron hips. So I would say the first two. I'm totally not into anything fairy tale slash Aesop's fables, all that redoing all that stuff. But I understand that some people are into it, and I wouldn't want that hang up to keep somebody's work out of the magazine.
Sure.
Because we got to have a wide variation of works.
Sure.
And of course, reading I think the end of the fall and the early winter, there was just terrible dry spell of just not finding anything in the slush pile that was worth getting past the first couple lines. And so when I see this is working on a totally different level. Yeah, I would say the first two are definitely worth the discussion.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Tim, I wanna jump in and say that this pile or this batch of poems, if I'm not mistaken, they were read by editors in Abu Dhabi, and we went on break in December and didn't have an editorial meeting, through December and January. So we pushed it into this conversation so we could get a vote, and it's primarily because of what you just said. Like, it really cut through the pile. Like it had enough of the editors here wanted to talk about it, and I was like busted that we weren't meeting again, and really wanted to push the conversation because we're trying to get the monsters issue filled.
Yep.
So that was part of this too.
Yeah, good. Yeah, clearly it did that.
Yeah.
It gets through the heap.
Yep. What are you thinking, Isabella?
I think I'm coming at it more from Tim's vantage point. I do appreciate the first poem for sure a lot, despite some of my personal hang-ups with it. I don't feel as strongly about thwack, but I also feel like it has that lingering quality that we were discussing earlier, and I can see people wanting to revisit it. And enough of those phrases, like teeth and velvet, obviously, which we've said a lot, has popped out. For the last two, they're just not... they're not as interesting for me. I really do think that you would skim over them more than the others. So I'm a yes for the first two.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think that takes care of the vote as well, guys. So we'll go with Pink Girl Takes a Tumble and Thwack.
But with an edit on thwack though, like on the is like a half star pack. Like I would ask the author
if she meant to have an A there. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So, Emily Corwin, Pink Girl Takes a Tumble, and Thwack. Thank you, Emily Corwin, for something fresh and exciting that stopped us in the dead of winter. We really appreciate that. I think that we should wrap it up for today, and I think it went pretty well. What do you guys think?
Yeah.
It's been fun.
Yeah, hang out. We can deconstruct
Oh my God,
it a little
I'm
bit.
so happy to meet you two, Isabella, and actually over the distances actually have a conversation with you and meet you both. This was great.
We heard a lot about you, Marion, so it was great to discuss something with you.
Oh, yeah.
Yay!
Yay. All right. Thanks, everybody. This has been Painted by Quarterly's Slush Pile, brought to you by Drexel's graduate program in publishing with partnership from NYU in Abu Dhabi.